They're not there with the free will awareness unit playing like everybody else, but they've been put into the game for a purpose. And that's what they do. And there's NPCs show up all the time for little cameo roles. They do things. If you pay attention, you can see lots of times, most people will have a brush with an NPC now and again. You hear a guy's lost in the woods, and then he gets his arm caught in a crack in a rock, and he can't move, and he was out hiking by himself, and he's just about on his last legs, and some guy shows up and gives him a drink of water and does this and does that, and he says, well, in a few minutes, the people looking for you are going to find you, but then that guy disappears. Who was that guy? Just, he's not there. And then the person remembers, oh yeah, he was dressed in a suit with dress shoes on, and he was in dress slacks. So they give a description of him, but it's not like somebody that's walking in the woods. So it's an NPC. It's come in to help them.
Welcome to the Endless Possibilities podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds.
Record. Hello and welcome to the Endless Possibilities podcast. My name is Gareth and I'm very excited today to be introducing my next guest, Tom Campbell. I'm going to give a little introduction into Tom. So Tom Campbell is a physicist, consciousness researcher, and author of My Big Toe. He's also an intellectual lecturer. He describes the nature of our larger reality, provides a complete theory of consciousness, and explains our purpose and connection to that larger reality. Along the way, Tom derives a more fundamental science that directly answers the most pressing problems and paradoxes of modern physics. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Garrett. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I'd like to just give a little bit of my background with Tom and how I stumbled across Tom. It was back in 2009, 2010. I had began this quest for knowledge and truth, and I had this fear of death that was in my system for a long time, and I wanted answers. And I came across, YouTube had kind of been out for a little while, and I came across a video by this gentleman called Bob Monroe. I started watching all Bob's videos that were on YouTube, and I went and I bought his books. And while I was buying his books, there was the suggestions on Amazon. This book came up, My Big Toe, Theory of Everything, is recommended by other readers. And I bought Tom's books. And eventually I came around to Tom's work, found all of Tom's videos, and early on reached out to Tom and on his Facebook. I think Tom had only about 10 or 12 friends at the time back then, back in the early days. And the next day Tom had replied, and he had told me to go onto his website and research this and research that. And 2 nights later, I started having conscious OBEs. I would start to wake up with energy and rushing up and down my body, sort of this whining noise in my ears. And I started to be able to separate from my physical form and explore. Now, I wasn't very good at it early on. I would also say that there wasn't a whole lot of spiritual growth with the OBEs. It was more me having a great experience and, a great story to tell people, but it didn't really do much for me. After about 1.5 years of just having these spontaneous experiences, it started to kind of go serious, right? I felt like I was being primed for something. I started, waking up in these classrooms in the non-physical, having lucid dreams, fear tests. And a lot of the times Tom was involved. I would sit and, and I know Tom would say it wasn't him. It was just a representation of him by the larger consciousness system. But these were really important, and, I learned a lot. So it's been a mission of mine for a long time to get Tom on the show. I also wrote a book 2 years ago, and I featured 2 chapters with all my experiences with Tom. So Tom, very happy to have you here. Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
We have a long history, it seems.
we do. So Tom, I have my own toe, right? It's not a big toe, it's a little toe. So over the last number of years, I have gone through a series of, what I would call spiritual awakenings. And I found that I kind of went off, I kind of started studying Hinduism. And the Hindus, those guys had quite a, they really have it mapped out, right? And everything that was going on for me, I found answers about non-duality and unity consciousness and all these different states. And eventually I got to these stages where I experienced what's known as Nirguna Brahman, right? Which is this attributeless version of the absolute. Absolutely terrifying, nothing there, no experience, no up, down. So I'd like to kind of get you to bridge what happened to me. So I wonder, could you explain the AUO concept and your experience of it and how you came to the conclusion? Like, how did you discover that in your explorations?
Well, I started very young when I was 7, maybe years old or so with my explorations, but I had the door shut on that and hadn't had any experiences until I was a physicist in graduate school and found out that I could debug my software with my mind. And that was much more efficient and effective and quicker than trying to debug it with my intellect. And by that I mean I could find the errors, the lines and what was of code and what was wrong with them and so on in my mind. And then I could go find that particular card. This is back in the days of punch cards, and sure enough, that card would have an error on it. So I was a physicist, and what physicists do is explore reality. They actually model reality. I shouldn't say explore it. Physicists model reality. And in their experiments, they explore reality. But here I was witnessing a whole nother part of reality that I didn't really know existed. So it was like, wow, look, I need to understand this. I need to understand how that works. How can I debug software? What's the mechanism? What's going on there? And the more I studied it, the more I realized there were rules, things that had to be in place or it didn't work, ways you had to be, where your mind had to be, the way your consciousness was. You couldn't just any old time say, "Oh, give me an answer." Well, answers wouldn't come. You'd have to be in the right mindset to ask for answers and expect, to get them. So there were rules. Well, once you have rules, you have something that is, I don't know, what can we say, a system. You have some kind of a system that's organized. I was only looking at a little tiny piece of it, but still, the fact that there were rules and that it obviously was about consciousness, most of the rules had to do with your consciousness being open, getting your intellect out of the way, those kinds of things. So I had this sense of the larger consciousness system. And because I could do things with my consciousness that would affect this reality, well, like debugging code, I was affecting this reality, but I was doing it with my mind. So there was lots of things that I could change here in the physical world with my intent, with my mind, if my mind was in the right place at the right time, focused in the right way, and so on. That's met the rules of this consciousness system. So I was looking for that system and its rules as I explored inner space, if you will, as I explored the larger consciousness system, as I ran into things in like out-of-body states, I was always asking, why is it like that? What's the point and the purpose? Why isn't it some other way? Why isn't that red light green? Why is it the way it is? There's purpose to this. It's not just a bunch of random stuff that you're experiencing. There's rules, there's purpose. So I kind of made it my job find out what the purpose and what those rules were. So I started out really looking for a system. And that very first system I found is what you call AUO. And I knew that it was fundamental because, like I say, I could change things here from there, but I couldn't change anything there from here. So the arrow of causality travels from consciousness to the physical world. It doesn't point the other direction. Things done in the physical world doesn't rearrange things in consciousness. So obviously, the consciousness system was more fundamental than the physical system. You just follow the arrow of causality, and what causes what tells you who's in charge, what happens first. So consciousness was fundamental, and everything else then would have to be some sort of product of consciousness. So then I was also looking for, well, that means this physical reality is somehow produced by consciousness. And that was a real big problem. It took me a long, long time, about 35 years to solve that problem of how did that take place. But I knew it had to take place somehow because consciousness is fundamental. So, I got to the AUO state because I was looking for it. I was looking for a way that this could be organized in some fashion that had purpose in some way. It had rules, and I was looking for the organizational aspects of it because that's what physicists do. I was going to make a model of it. How did it work? And then discover why did it work that way. So my first few attempts at that kind of landed in what my books call AUO. It was like the basic foundation of consciousness. I realized then in that 35 years or so that I was trying to figure out the connection between consciousness and the physical world and everything else, I realized that consciousness was an information system. It's all about information. It has to do with your awareness, and your awareness has to be kind of aware in the right way. So I say there's rules, but when it gets down to it, what you're experiencing, your experience is just information. And I realized that in the physical world, that was the same too. There really wasn't so much a world out there as there was information that we got. You could model the physical world the same way. Oh, there is no physical world. It's just information. We get information and we interpret that information in terms of five senses. What we hear, see, feel, smell, touch. That's how we gather that information. We interpret it. What does it mean? What does that touch mean? What does that smell mean? And that has to do with memory. It has to do with what we learn as infants. We learn the difference between mom and an apple. We begin to put things together, and eventually we have some sense of what things mean and what they are. And we're just learning. The little red thing that tastes good is an apple, and we get that data, we recognize it. Oh, that's an apple. Mm. So it's like that. So I started building up this model of consciousness, really. But since that was the fundamental thing, it's also a model of reality because consciousness is reality. That's the fundamental reality is consciousness. So that's how I started. So that's a physicist's viewpoint of suddenly becoming aware that there are other reality frames which are supersets to the reality frame that, it's a superset to the reality frame that we're in, and then trying to figure it out. So that's how I got there, basically by a logical deduction and looking at my own experiences and what they meant. And why did I get that experience? Why did that big monster run out and, try to bite me? Well, I soon realized that if you just said, "Hi, monster, having a nice day," that they'd poof into smoke and disappear, and then obviously that monster was a fear test. It was something, seeing if it could frighten me. And then, of course, you stop being frightened about things like that. You grow beyond those kinds of fears. And as you reduce fears, more and more of what you're trying to understand becomes available. And you begin to see more and more of it as the fear drops away. And then you realize that fear is the thing that is the barrier between you and this larger reality is fear. And as you release that fear, you become a better person. It's that fear that makes you act badly. It's that fear that makes you angry. It's that fear that gets you upset. It's that fear that causes you stress. And it seemed to be about getting rid of fear. And it seemed that where I was in this physical reality started to feel more and more like a schoolhouse. And I was a student. So I'm sure you're nodding your head. You've been through all the same,
Yeah.
you've been through all the same processes. And I just put it together a little bit at a time with my experiences until I finally found a way to describe it all with one coherent story with a minimum of variables and only one assumption, and that's that consciousness exists. So
But Tom,
that's kind of how I got there.
AUO, when I got there, it was primordial. There was just no experience. Did you come across that as well? Or it's just
Well, that place is what I would call point consciousness. Point consciousness, there is no experience. Point consciousness, you just exist as a point of consciousness. The only thing you're aware of is that you're aware. You're aware that you're aware and nothing else. It's a black void where nothing else exists. No thoughts, really. No perceptions, no light, no sound. And that point consciousness state is kind of what I see as a springboard. That's the launch pad for everything else. Because when you get to point consciousness, what that does is it tells you that you're ready to go on. You've achieved this point where you can let go of your intellect. It's not jammering. You can let go of your data stream, which is defining your reality. You get all this data. Oh, here it is, a physical reality, and there's my room and its walls and the pictures and the floor, and you have all this physical. You let go of all that. Nothing physical, no sound, no light, nothing. Well, that's the perfect state from which to explore, to then do something, have an intent, and follow that intention to its consequences. And the system, when you do that, it will give you a little storyline, if you will. It'll send you some information in which you can learn something. It sends you a little vignette in which you play a part and you can learn something. So I just call that point consciousness. And point consciousness is the place to start. So most of the students, I teach them to go to point consciousness first. And many have a problem with that. It's a difficult thing to unplug completely and just be a point of awareness floating in a black void. What seems to you to be an infinite black void in all directions. And that's a really good first step. So if you want to learn about, not only spirituality, but if you want to learn about consciousness, you want to explore the larger consciousness system, then becoming adept at putting yourself in point consciousness is the first step to go. So that's what you're describing is this black void.
So primordial consciousness, AUO, evolved into the larger consciousness system, correct?
Yes.
And so at the top, right, when I kind of got to that, right, AUO, what I call Brahman, and then I came across, actually the following day, this sea of pure potential, pure love, it was the most incredible place I've ever been. Cyan blue. If I could have stayed there for the rest of my life, I would have been, it was amazing, right? And that to me, I somehow understood that all of these Hindu gods that were blue, right? Krishna, somehow they were personal versions of that reality, right? That supreme reality. And that to me was like the mind of God. Is that what you would call the larger consciousness system?
I think that would be a fair metaphor. You could call it the mind of God. I don't tend to use that word, but then I don't come from a religious viewpoint.
Yeah,
I just call it, all that is,
yeah,
or the source, or just the larger consciousness system. But I can see that the mind of God is a perfectly good, actually an excellent metaphor to use.
yeah. And that somehow sprang out of AUO, right? Over time,
Hmm.
it evolved, right? And then
Yes.
what I could gather was that pure potential then split itself into two and created another version of itself, right? And this might be your larger, this what you call the big computer, right? So the
Hmm.
Hindus would call this the Divine Mother, right? And it passed all of its
Hmm.
power to her, and she was the one then that could create all of the virtual realities.
Uh-huh.
Am I right in bridging that?
Okay. Yeah, that sounds fair. Now, I'm not a student of the Hindu religion, so I don't know a lot about that. But yes, the when I say that consciousness is an information system, I mean that in a very general way. It's an information system. It works with data, it works with information,
Mm,
and it can take a part of itself and configure itself as a computer. Something that crunches numbers, basically, deals with mathematics, the logic of quantity. And when it does that, computer can be the server for a virtual reality. And indeed, that's what happens. The system comes up with a need for a virtual reality. It needs this virtual reality to give its individuated units of consciousness experience, more valuable experience than just chatting with each other. So it creates this virtual reality by letting it evolve, not by programming it. So it lets the virtual reality revolve, and when the virtual reality has evolved avatars, it's just a digital system when it evolves avatars of a sufficient quality and quantity, then it lets its pieces of consciousness log on and make the choices for those avatars. And then the experience becomes significant moral choices, ethical choices, life and death choices. Save yourself or save your family, save your tribe, get something to eat, find shelter, deal with animals. It just every day is a set of life and death important choices,
yeah.
many of them being ethical and moral choices. And those are the choices by which you grow up. When you make those choices correctly, and you do that time and time again, then you grow up, you evolve, you move forward. And that's kind of the fast track in evolution as opposed to just chit-chatting with your other individual units of consciousness. Well, you can grow up there too, but it's kind of limited and it's very slow. So then we have this virtual reality, and that virtual reality is served, if you will, in a computer term, by the larger consciousness system. So it configures part of itself as a information system that's a computer. So yes, and you in your Hindu, I don't know what you call it, Hindu mythology or Hindu
Philosophy, yeah.
philosophy or whatever, then you have that same thing, which is the mother, and that's a good thing because the mother then births, births
Yeah.
us, births the physical. So the mother is a good metaphor for that. And also a metaphor that you'll find, I think, in Hindu is, I think it is Indra's jewels, where at first you have the void,
Yep.
and then the void quickens. When the void was nothing, no thing,
Yep.
but it had potential, a potential void. When it quickens now, it's pregnant with possibility, and that possibility forms into something substantial. And that is Indra and her jewels. And in my mind, these jewels are like network. There's strings to these jewels. They're here in other places, and that's the networking. It shows that consciousness is networked. every consciousness is connected to all the other consciousnesses, and together we form a network of consciousness. And that is the beginning of, of us, I guess. And that might be the mother. Indra maybe is the mother, and the jewels are the, all the other pieces of consciousness, and all netted, and the virtual reality. So I've kind of rubbed up against that piece of Hindu understanding, and that all fits very well too, because we talk about Indra's net, which is just the same word we use today. 3,000 years later, we're on the net, and it meant the same thing then. They were on the net, they were networked and connected. So yeah, there's a lot of commonality between the ancient Hindu.
Oh, it's incredible what those guys mapped out.
And then, of course, Buddhism, which came out of Hinduism, and the My Big Tao, they all kind of run together like that. And it wasn't because I studied them first. It's just there's one truth. And when you find that truth, you end up in basically the same place. You use different metaphors, you use different names, but it's all the same. It's all the same truth.
Okay.
And people have been finding that truth for eons.
So where do we fit into it, Tom? So what I experienced was at the center of what I am, okay, I am a droplet of that AUO, right? I have this unbounded awareness, right? That's at the center of what I am. But I also have beingness, right? I have what you call a free will awareness unit, right? So I found that I'm both. I'm a droplet of what you call AUO, I would call Brahman, right? I'm a droplet of that. That's my being, that's my awareness, right? It's just watching, allowing, unbounded peace. And then there's a part of me that has free will, right? And what I took was that the part of me that has the free will is somehow a spark of that, what I call the mind of God. Would I be right in saying that? So I'm both a droplet of the Brahman or the AUO, and I'm a spark of the mind of God in one.
Well, that is, again, a totally different metaphor, but not a bad way of putting it. I would give it a more technical metaphor.
Sure.
Of course, I'm a physicist.
Yeah.
I see the world through logical means, and I would say that consciousness is an information machine, is an information system, and information systems can create what we call, now the word jumped out of my mind, but it can create a smaller computer within the bigger computer. Okay, now an information system, we'll just generally call an information system a computer, because it takes information, it sorts it, it assesses it, it makes choices, and that's what computers do. So they're called virtual machines in computer talk. So a big mainframe can make a whole bunch, 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 of these little virtual computers. And then thousands of users can use those little virtual computers. They're all actually using the mainframe, but to the user, it's like their own little computer. They have memory, they have a certain amount of processor, they have a certain amount of storage, they have all these things that make a little computer. And their computer is partitioned off from everybody else's computer. So they're all a bunch of little independent computers that are part of this larger computer. So these virtual machines is a machine within a machine, a virtual computer within a bigger computer. I see the individuated units of consciousness like a virtual machine. It's a subset of the larger consciousness system. It contains all the stuff the larger conscious system contains. It contains memory and processing and,
but limited, right?
Purpose. Pardon?
It's limited though, right? We don't have the same
but
capacity.
It's limited.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the same capacity, but it has basically the same components, but at a lesser capacity. So it's a piece. It's a subset, but it's not a separate thing. It's really still just the larger conscious system. We're all one. We really are all one in this larger conscious system, but we're subsets of it. So in a way, we're unique and different and separate, but in another way, we're not separate at all. We're just a subset of a larger system. So that's, that's the way I come to that understanding. And in this separateness, we have awareness. And if you have awareness, you have free will. You can't have awareness without free will. You can't have consciousness without free will. I define consciousness as awareness with a choice. That's my definition of consciousness. It's awareness with a choice. So you're aware of something. What you're aware of is the input data you get. You're aware of the data coming in. And you have memory, you have processing, you have a purpose. You process the data, you check it against your memory, you decide what your next decision or choice should be, and you make a choice that helps take you towards your purpose. And in this case, your purpose is to become love, to lower your entropy. So that's how I break that up. Now, because my piece parts, larger conscious system, individual units of consciousness, free will awareness units, I make up a piece part for every function that I see. So I'm out there exploring the larger conscious system, and I see these various functions. There's the function of source. That's where it all starts. Or in your case, the mind of God. That's where it all starts, and my metaphor for that's the larger consciousness system. But then you also have the subsets of it, the pieces that interact. Okay, that's us, it's you, and that's me. We're pieces of consciousness. But there's a part of us that we put into the virtual reality and a part of us that's outside the virtual reality. So I call the part that's outside the virtual reality an IUOC, an individuated unit of consciousness. And a piece of that IUOC gets partitioned off. And then when it gets partitioned off, it retains the level of entropy of its mother or of its parent, IUOC. So with that level of evolution that it has so far, then it becomes totally immersed in this virtual reality, such that it has no memory of where it was
that's us,
before,
Tom,
what it
right?
did before.
That's us descending down. And the other part you're talking about is like the oversoul.
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that. So we are that free will awareness unit. We're connected to fully connected to this avatar. So in our own mind, the first thing that ever happened to us is whatever that avatar did. It's maybe in utero, and we see light and we hear voices, and that's our first memories. So obviously we identify with that avatar because we don't have any memories other than that, because we came in with nothing but our level of quality of consciousness. And we identify now with the avatar. We think we are the avatar, and we make all the avatar's choices. So now we are a player in the virtual reality. But our parent, if you will, where we come from, is this IUOC, which is just a virtual machine inside the larger, reality. So I kind of, those are my metaphors, because one of the things I wanted to do is make this very understandable to people today, so they didn't have to interpret poetry. Rather, I made it in current times, 2024 metaphors, so that people would get it better. Because some people, if you start with the mind of God, they'll turn you off right away because they're atheists and they don't go to God, So they turn that off and won't even pay any attention to you. So I let them realize, after they understand the whole picture, that the larger conscious system is just what everybody else calls God. And they've gotten there anyway, but they've gotten there through logic rather than through theology or religion. But it all turns out to the same thing, just called source. That's where we all start, what we all are part of, and the origin of it all. So I use very different metaphors than you, but that is basically what you're saying is a very similar thing. So you have this basic piece of consciousness, the IUOC, and because it is the accumulator of experience, its free will awareness units go out and make choices for an avatar. But when that avatar dies, that free will awareness unit, now the partition's taken down. And that IUOC then, has all that information and all that data. And it looks at all the lifetimes that it's had, comes up with what it wants to do next and what it needs to learn, and it does the strategy. It connects and say, it sometimes gets some counseling, and it says, okay, I'm ready to go. All right, I'll do this next lifetime. And then it takes another free will awareness unit, it partitions it off, sends it out to do that. And when that avatar dies, then all that comes back. So you need the IUOC, the individuated unit of consciousness, to be there to accumulate all of that experience. That's its function.
And Tom, what does that look like?
You can learn from that experience.
So what does that IOUC look like? Like, where is it? Where is it hanging out?
It's just a piece of consciousness. It's a piece of the larger consciousness system. It's just again, think of a virtual machine inside of a computer. Where's it hanging out? Oh, it's hanging out all over the place. It doesn't have to be hanging out even in a particular, there is no distance. There is no space there. So it's everything. If you think of a great big mainframe computer and you're going to go in there and you're going to work with just a little piece of it, well, you may have a piece of memory from over here and a piece of processing from over there, and you may have your data files someplace else. And computers are just information. So where is it? It's not necessarily all pulled into a spot. It just is. It's a part of the larger system.
Subset.
The system keeps track of where everything is. Mm-hmm. Now, the system could put all those things together, but it doesn't have to, because it's not like if you put them together, they can communicate better because the wires are all shorter. There are no wires. There is no distance.
Yeah.
You see? So it doesn't really need to put it all together. So you're just a subset of the mind of God. You're just a piece of that. And there isn't anywhere, is it? And where does it hang out?
What I mean by that, Tom, is
question.
It's not in a virtual reality having an experience, right? It's just, part of consciousness.
It's just a part of the consciousness system.
But it's aware of us.
Its awareness is of its free will awareness unit. And I don't think it just waits until that free will awareness unit, comes back and before it gets its information. I expect it's getting information as it happens all the time, comparing it, assessing it. So you could think of it as your oversoul or your higher self, or one of those metaphors would make a pretty decent metaphor. It's sitting there collecting the lifetimes. It's really who you are fundamentally. Okay, you're a free will awareness unit called Tom for a while, and then you're not. Now, next time you're a free will awareness unit called Jill or Sally, and now one called, Gareth, and those come and go. And after one's partitioned off, it does its function, the partition's taken down, and you're just back into the individuated unit of consciousness again. So it's the fundamental thing that continues is this IUOC. And that's what you are, basically. That's your larger permanent identity, is that piece of consciousness. So you learn, you grow, you sort through the information and realize, oh, geez, the last 10 lifetimes I've had a lot of trouble with this or that. These things always get me angry. I get into all kinds of problems with anger management. And you come up with a plan to learn the things you don't know. You take that free will awareness unit and you tell it, don't get angry. That's a problem we've got. You need to deal with that this time. Don't get angry. So that free will awareness comes in with a little extra mission attached to it because it's been lectured on its anger management problem. So it's part of the process. Yes, it's active. It's not just sitting there unaware of anything, but it's the collector. It's the assimilator of all the experiences that you have. It's the thing that when that free will awareness unit returns because the avatar dies, it's the thing that negotiates for the next lifetime. Well, we picked out this for you. Well, no thanks. I'd rather have one like that because that will suit me better, what it is I need to learn. So it does negotiation. It's the part that is shown the life review to try to show it what some of the problems are. Oh, you've got an anger management problem, and you say, no, me, not me. It's other people. Other people just make me angry. It's not me. So they do a little life review, and they show you flying off the handle, dozens and dozens of times for almost no good reason at all. And then you go, oh, yeah, I guess I do have a problem. So those life reviews take place. It's the way the system helps us grow. And that is a very interesting and important part of this, is that the system helps us. It's not just we're these subsets of it, and he makes all the subsets and then doesn't give a damn, we're on our own. It's not like that, because as we grow up, it grows up because we're a part of it. As we lower our entropy, the system entropy gets lowered. So it has an incentive to help us succeed in lowering our entropy. And it does. It has evolved to be as helpful as it can be to us who are on this path. So when you're ready for the next step, it's right there, putting that next step right in front of your foot. All you have to do is embrace it and learn from it. But it's right there in front of you. As you need help, you get stuck someplace, well, it will start giving you what you need to get unstuck. So it's not just that mama loves its babies. It's not that sort of thing. It's that our success is its success. It's evolving in order to be successful. So part of the way it evolves is to set itself up to be of maximum help to we who are evolving and need that help. So it's there, and that's a very important thing to know about the system, is that if you work with it, it'll work with you. If you're actually learning and growing and getting rid of your fear and becoming love, you will find everything you need falls at your feet just as you need it. A concept, an idea, a bigger picture, an understanding, just as you need it, there it is, right there in front of you. And then everything in your life gets to be magical, because literally everything you need falls at your feet just when you need it the most. And that sounds like it's ridiculous. What do you mean? Manna from heaven falls out when you're hungry? Yes, it does. And it's just a matter of having a good working relationship with the larger consciousness system. If you try and you're working and you're learning and you're serious, well, it is serious about helping you. If you're not serious and you're goofing off and playing around, then it doesn't really pay a whole lot of attention, because there's not much it can do to help you. If it sends you some messages, you won't get them. They'll just go through one ear and out the other, and you won't process it. So, yes, it gives its attention to those who can use it. So if you need some help, all you have to do is get serious and start learning.
And Tom, what does the larger consciousness system expect of us, right? The ones that start to evolve and become love and to be of service. What does that start to look like, right? How would the larger consciousness system start getting behind an individual unit that's helping out? What would that look like? What's the, yeah.
Well, the larger conscious system really doesn't expect anything of us. It just helps us where we can use help. But we have free will. We can always do whatever, we make whatever choice we make. We can de-evolve as well as evolve. So it just lets us be. Now it'll help us by giving us maybe an alternative, by showing us something, by giving us some information that we need to understand something. So it helps us, those kinds of things. But the general way it happens, or that happens to a person as they grow up, first of all, it's mostly just about yourself, and you're growing up. And you're learning that as you let go of trying to control things, you don't need to control things. Everything shuffles in, turns out to be optimized already. And if you actually tried to control things, you'd make it worse. You wouldn't make it better. you think you're going to control things to make everything better, but you realize that's just your ego.
Yeah.
And you can't make anything better than just the way it's going to fall out anyway. So you start to accepting things, and instead of how can I make this come out the way I want, it's just, well, whatever happens next is a challenge, and I will use it. I'll learn from it, and I'll grow from it. I'll deal with it, and I'll deal with it positively, with love. So you do that for a while, and initially it's all about you because you're growing up and you're learning, and that's where you need to be focused on your own growth. But as you focus on your growth, you start seeing bigger pictures. You start getting more information. You understand where other people are coming from. You can feel their feelings. You can even taste the food they're eating if you want to, but you have connections. You have a bigger picture, a bigger data set, which makes you more helpful, which makes you, a bigger part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So as you evolve, you start to become more of a teacher. You become more of somebody who's helping others grow up. Now, you're still working on yourself. It's not that you've stopped working on yourself, because you're always going to work on yourself. You always have to do that. But you have more and more understanding that you can be more helpful to other people. And you realize that you can't help other people by lecturing to them. You have to meet them where they are and help them take the next step, in a positive direction. Just dealing with their intellect, well, that is maybe a little bit of help sometimes, but just dealing with their intellect is not a very good way to change people. People have to change from the inside out. They don't change from the outside in. So the growth step it's mostly about you. It's about you and others. It's mostly about others. And then up above that, it's mostly about not just helping the others around you, but helping the others in terms of thousands of others, tens of thousands and others, starting to be a more helpful part at a higher level in a bigger picture. And never outgrow that. It's not like one day you get to the end and you've grown up as much as you can and you've learned everything and now you're done. And now you get to go off and play your harp on a cloud someplace forever, and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
You're never done. That's not the way the system works. If you think you're done, that means you're beginning to de-evolve, and you better get back to work, because that's just going to get worse if you don't attend to it. So what you need to do is help. And the more you evolve, the more help you can be. You can be of bigger and bigger, more and more significant help. So you're never done. There's always somebody else who needs some help, and you should be available to help them. And help comes in many levels. Help can just be somebody who's kind. Help can be somebody who teaches large numbers of people. Help comes in all sorts of shades and colors and sizes. You don't have to be dramatic, to be helpful. But in any case, so you become mainly helpful with showing kindness and understanding to larger numbers of people. And that never gets old. There's always, in this virtual reality anyway, there's always a large need for people who really do understand. If we could get just 10% of the population to understand that the point of life is to become love, even just 10% of the 9 billion people understand that, well, that would be phenomenal. That would be tremendous. The other 90% would probably come along in a couple of decades. But instead, mostly we end up being in the margins. We're not in the mainstream. Particularly if we're religious, we're not in the mainstream. If we're philosophers, we're not in the mainstream. The people who are in the mainstream are the scientists. The scientists, I call them the high priests of Western culture. They tell everybody else what to believe. So if we're going to get into the mainstream where we can really, reach the people by the billions, then we're going to need to do it through science. We're going to need to get the scientists to say, yes, this is a virtual reality. And yes, the whole point here is to become love. And that's a fact because, these experiments show it, and that's the solution. And that model produces better answers. And if you can get them to that point, and they say that to the rest of the population, then we're in the mainstream. And within a couple of decades, this world will be a different place.
So,
It'll be a more
so,
caring, more supportive place.
so Tom, even by just giving them the information, right, they have an intellectual understanding, right, that we're in a virtual reality. Generally, my understanding is, right, talking to people's minds isn't always the best, solution,
No,
right? And it's all about, for me, right,
no,
it's all about experience, right? Love, feeling
right.
it, having, like we can
You
all
got to live
understand
it.
we got to live it, right? And I wonder, like,
Yeah.
what part does our heart, like the spiritual heart, where we feel love in our chests, and the emotions that are behind that, like, so, in one sense, I understand that the larger consciousness system is an information system, but then on the other hand, we're beings, right, that love and have emotions and care and cry, and we feel
Hmm.
energy and we sense people. So I wonder, like, some people might think that, just seeing us as like information, it's a bit cold. It's a bit,
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a difference between what it is and how it works.
okay.
What it is love.
Yeah.
That's what it is. How it works is like an information system. You see, you have to, those are two different things. So it has to, anything that has an effect, anything that really is a thing, has to have rules and structure and process. Otherwise, nothing gets done. You can't evolve, or, there's nothing to evolve if you don't have structure and process and rules. So you have to have a system with rules. Now, that the how of the system, how does it work? Well, that's the structure and the rules is what defines how it works. But what is it? What is it is a system of consciousness that is evolving toward becoming love. It's all about love and caring and helping and that sort of thing. So that's what it is. So you can't just have this little ball of love that is just all warm and squishy and nice and tingly, but it doesn't have any structure, it doesn't have anything. It's just this big ball of love because that doesn't evolve. That doesn't, that doesn't teach. That's just nice and tingly and squirmy for you and maybe for others, but it doesn't continue on. It doesn't grow. It doesn't evolve. It doesn't become. It doesn't make subsets of itself. It doesn't create virtual realities. It doesn't do all that stuff. But in order for the system to continue growing, it has to lower its entropy. So it is the system of love and caring. And it is warm and fuzzy and squishy. But that's what it is. It's also how it gets by, how it grows, how it evolves. What's the structure, the rules behind it? You can't have no rules. That's, it's like if you and I were to sit down and play a game and I'd say, okay, Gareth, go ahead, you start. And you say,
Yeah.
start, well, what are the
Yeah.
rules? Well, if I say, oh, it doesn't matter about rules, just start. What's the game? You see, you would have no idea what to do or how to do it. It's like, never mind. Like you walk away. There's nothing you can do. So you first have to have structure, and that structure can support a way of being and an attitude, and that structure is supporting love. Love growing, love being, helping, caring about each other in a social system. So we're talking about multiple things interacting with each other. And that's all these little subsets because social system now has a whole lot more possibilities as far as growing and becoming than just one big monolithic thing. One big monolithic thing is just the thing. And it's got one viewpoint. A whole bunch of things now. You have a social system, and with a social system, lowering entropy suddenly has a meaning. It means love, caring, being helpful in a social system. with
But
one monolithic thing. Love doesn't have that meaning. It doesn't have that meaning of helping. There's nobody to help. So that's why you need to have the structure that allows itself to create multiple things. You see, it's the love thing is enabled by the structure.
But Tom, also what I noticed was the more we evolve, right, and the more we become love, love is almost like the feedback mechanism that we kind of register how we're progressing. And it feels good to do good things, right? It feels good to help people, not because it's like we, on an intellectual understanding, we think we should do this to help people and heal people, but actually it feels good. Like it feels really nice.
Absolutely.
But there's
It
a whole
feels
lot of
really nice when
people that don't have that. They don't feel that. They're completely closed off from
yeah,
love.
right. That's because they're full of fear. See, that's the thing. They're full of fear. If you're full of fear, then you don't feel any of that stuff. You have to get rid of the fear. As you get rid of the fear, what's left is love. And it's not like you have to go out and somehow build love. You just have to get rid of the fear. Your consciousness, the capacity for love is there. It's built in. It's natural. It's part of who you are, what you are. You have to get rid of the fear. It's the fear inhibits that expression of that love, the feeling of that love. But just a consciousness isn't an intellect. You know, many people have that idea, oh, you're conscious, you're an intellect, you think. Well, consciousness is a lot more than intellect. The consciousness is feeling, it's awareness, it's understanding. It's not just the objective intellectual side, it's the subjective side of the thinking and the feeling and the being. That's the real, that's the real deal. Yes, you've got this intellect because sometimes you just need how to figure out where you left your glasses and your car keys, and it takes a little intellect is good for that. Oh, where did I last use them? And oh yeah, it was when I came into the house, and oh yeah, I set them down. Oh, that's where they are. So the intellect is a handy thing to have in a social system. If you're going to interact with others, you have to understand others and some of their needs and wants, and you have to understand your own tools and things that you use. So intellect is a nice tool, but it's not the main game. The main game, intellect's just a tool that you have. Many of us in our culture, we think the intellect's all there is. That's the main game. So we develop that and develop that. We got a high polish and sheen on that intellect. And our intuitive side is worse than it was when you were 3 years old. It's actually degenerated from when you were a very young child. And you're unbalanced. You have this big intellect and you have this tiny little intuitive side, and that is not good. You need to develop that intuitive side because that's where the real stuff is. That's where the important stuff is. The intellect works with all the stuff, with all the objective stuff. The intuitive side works with all the subjective stuff. And if you look at what's objective and subjective, you find out that everything that really matters is subjective. Justice is subjective. Love is subjective. Relationship is subjective. All of that, all the stuff that's important is all on the subjective side. It's about feeling and attitude. All the stuff that's objective is just the stuff. It's the matter. And one of the metaphors I like to use is like going to a play. If you go to a play and the only thing you do is watch the props, it's going to be a very boring play without a whole lot of significance. But that's like the props are the objective part of the play. The subjective part are what the actors are saying, the story that's unfolding, the relationships between the characters, what's going on and what's happening. That's all the subjective part. That's why you go to a play, to connect with the subjective parts. You don't go to watch the props. But here we are in our culture, we polish up that intellect and go watch props, and we miss an awful lot of what's important because we do that. So, yeah, that's just where we are. And the reason I say that the scientists will have to lead us into that being kinder and gentler is not that the scientists themselves are going to get a whole lot kinder and gentler. They won't. They're all locked up in their intellect.
Yeah.
But when they tell the world this is a virtual reality, to the scientists, they'll say, and that's it. That's all we know. It's just like that. Okay, let's go on with our intellectual process here. But the rest of the world is going to look at that and say, what? A virtual reality? What does that mean? And the population will take that and run with it. And it could be good, it could be not so good. The population could get into my God's a better programmer than your God, and we could be fighting about it. But eventually we'll get to the point that love is the answer. We're all here to grow up and so on. And when you get to that, then we will have arrived and our life will be happier and less traumatic like it is now. Now the world is struggling and fighting and grabbing and nasty. That will change, but it's not because the physicists will become love. They won't. They're all locked up in their intellects, but they will open the gate to let everybody else see the world in a context other than physical reality. And if that's why I think that they're going to have to lead it, because they're the key to get into the mainstream.
Mm.
I don't know of any other way to get in the mainstream.
Well,
Krishna and Buddha have been in the margins for millennia, and they're still in the margins. They're not mainstream.
I
Now
mean,
they have a pretty good presence in the margins, but
yeah.
still.
I mean, someone who just totally just springs to mind straight away is someone like Joe Rogan, right? His podcast, who could reach millions and millions of people. And he kind of has that target audience already, people that have an open mind. So, yeah, I think maybe it might be a mix of people like Joe Rogan, for instance, and, people like Elon Musk who can reach a huge audience and people will listen to them. But it's how do you connect with them? And maybe you should go on the Joe Rogan podcast, Tom.
Maybe if he would want to do a serious interview with me, I'd be delighted.
Yeah.
Fly up to New York and stand around and wait to see if he might be interested in playing word games with you. That's not too interesting.
Sure.
But Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, they're like the opening act. You know how a really good band has an opener. They don't open, they don't start. They send somebody out to warm up the crowd, get the crowd, moving and whatever. And I see that Joe Rogan and Elon Musk are like the opening act. They're not really the good musicians. They're the second tier, but they stir things up. They're good at stirring the pot and getting everybody up on their feet and warmed up and excited about things. So they can do that very well. But in themselves, they don't really have a whole lot to offer.
Okay.
So, but if they get the crowd warmed up and they get the crowd to where, right now, if you took a survey, we got almost 9 billion people. If you just went on randomly talk to 100,000 of those 9 billion people, you'd probably find that 90% of them will say, we need to do better. Things aren't right. The world's in an awful state. It's not necessarily a good place to live. People don't care about each other. Lying, cheating, and stealing is the norm. And, in general, the world sucks. It's not a great place to live, but I don't know what to do about that, and I don't know how to solve it. It's just the way it is. We're kind of stuck here. It's always been this way. And that would be the attitude. And that would be the attitude with some passion, not just an intellectual attitude, but that would come out of a deep feeling. We want something better. But for the last 200,000 years, just as long as we've been walking around, all we've had is warlords in charge of us, socially. And it's like, can we find something better? They don't know. But if they suddenly got to an understanding of what could be better and what would be required and what the world really is, it's not a material, whoever grabs the most stuff is on the top of the pile. It's not that kind of thing, but it's who grows up and becomes kinder and more sharing and caring. That's what's important. If that changed, then we see a really big change. Suddenly, if we can give those people a way out, we'll give those people a way out once 10 or 20% of us are have that understanding, the others will look at it and grab for it, because everybody's hungry for change, something that works better. Everybody's dissatisfied with this world we live in. You know, everybody looks at the world, except maybe the billionaires. Everybody looks at the world and says, the world sucks. And the billionaires are mostly very unhappy people. They're usually, miserable because they don't have what's really important. They have more money than anybody could possibly ever spend, but they don't have love. They don't have caring. They don't have relationship. They have stand-ins for all that stuff for the most part. They love the money, and they don't have one, so they're not happy, fulfilled people. They keep getting more and more money, thinking that'll make them happy or make them something, but it never does, and it never will. So yeah, I think it's possible. I think we can break out of this, and I think the Joe Rogans of the world are softening up the crowd for what comes next, getting the crowd to realize that they want something more and want something better, but that you don't get it through violence. It has to come some other way. And yes, but when we finally get there, we'll look back and we'll look at all the old religions, and we'll say, oh, geez, that's what they've been talking about all along, and we'll finally get that, but it won't be because we're following a religion. It'll be because we found a better way to be, because it's not about acting, it's about being. And most people, when they get into a religious organization, they think it's about acting. It's what you do that's important. You have to act like this and act like that. Well, maybe they get to be good actors, but that doesn't help them become good human beings. It's you have to be like this. You have to be kind, not just act kind. So that's why we've always seen some rather low quality warring and fighting and nastiness coming out of the religious circles as well. They're not being it. They're not walking the talk. They're just talking it and trying to act it. But as much as they act like the little saints outside, they're living kind of unhealthy, sordid lives on the inside that they keep secret. And anyway, I think most people would agree we need to change. They're just looking for that change. If somebody could bring it to them and show them how the world really works. If we would go from materialists to, what would be the thing, idealists, I guess, thinking there is something bigger than ourselves, and that thing is about love, then we can make a lot of progress in a short amount of time.
So Tom, I've been working with people for the last 5 years, and it started out online, and I would have like a Zoom meeting, right, where people would come. And about 5 years ago, in and around the time when I met you in Lumley Castle, I had a full Kundalini awakening, right, where the Kundalini traveled all the way up and got into my brain, and the brain kind of felt like it opened up, and then all of a sudden I started to become transmissive, right? Almost like I had a field of energy around myself. And when I would sit with other people, they were then able to have an experience of my state of consciousness or tap into it in some way where their consciousness could temporarily become expanded or, just deepened, right? And over the years, the group has grown, and sometimes like there's over 100 people turn up. But this is something that's happening, right? And people are coming and having a direct experience. They're going, okay, I'm not just reading about it. I'm not just, watching a video on YouTube and taking somebody's word for it. I'm coming into this group, I'm sitting, and I'm having a direct experience. Some of them, see light, some of them feel energy moving around their bodies, but they're all leaving with a direct experience. And that's changing people. It's like,
So the people are having experiences. They feel different. They feel things. They walk out different. 4 or 5 days go by and they go back to where they were. But
Yeah.
They feel different when they're around you or in your class or with other people. Yeah, that's very understandable. That's the way consciousness works. That's a, what do we call it? A collective consciousness. It's the opposite side of the negative collective consciousness, which we call a mob.
Yeah.
You get a mob, and all the people in the mob are angrier than any one of them would be by themselves. But the mob together, they feed off each other's anger, and the mob will do things that not anybody in the mob would ever do on their own. Well, that's the negative side of that collective consciousness. On the upper side of it, you get people who are loving and caring and high quality of consciousness. People get around them, and instead of feeling angrier, they feel less angry. They feel happier. They feel opened. They feel connected. They feel things that normally they don't feel in their everyday life because now they're part of a collective consciousness that's tugging them upward, not tugging them downward. And that's a real thing. And the more people that you have around you, if you got you and 80 people, and you've been talking to these 80 people for the last 2 or 3 years, they've grown up a lot, then the group of you have a pretty strong collective consciousness, and somebody comes in and joins you, and it's like, wow, this is a palatable, experience. You
Mm.
walk into this group, and it's almost immediate. It's not subtle anymore. It's the opposite of being slapped in the face by a dead fish. It's the opposite of that. It's suddenly just everything seems to make sense and feels good,
Yeah.
and you feel connected and you're happy and and you feel joy. And you don't really know why because it's not intellectual, it's all in the intuitive side. But that's the collective consciousness, and that's a good thing. That's why I say that if 10% of us can get there, the rest will come, because that 10% will create a bubble, will create a collective consciousness, and the rest of the people will bump into that somewhere and they'll go, oh, this feels good. I want to join this too. I want to be a part of this. So if you don't have to get a majority of the people, just a strong minority will be enough. And what they have, it feels so good that people will go to it and flock to it and can become part of it. So you only need a sizable minority, but that has to be uh, open so that people can come. If it's a closed thing, like a church, oh, you have to come and you have to swear your fealty and you have to put money in the box or whatever. It has to be an open thing that everybody's invited, everybody's here.
Yeah.
Atheists are welcome, everyone can come, and it needs to be a very inclusive of everyone sort of a thing, not this is our club. And, everybody in our club is more grown up. It's can't be like that. It
So,
has to
so it
be
is
very
that. It
open.
is that, Tom. It is. It definitely is. There's no charge. It's open to absolutely anybody who wants to come. And I've been doing that twice a week for 5 years, and I never miss it. And what I've noticed was that some of the people who join, they go off to their little corners of the world and they start their little groups. And then it's spreading
Mhm.
out like the net, like Indra's net. It's definitely having an effect.
Yeah.
And people are waking up to their true nature and they're becoming love.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it seems like kind of the whole concept to me came from India. You have these, what I would, what they call in India, the avatars, right? I know you say that we're all avatars, but in India, they have this concept of aspects of the Divine Mother that descend down to help humanity, and they're known as avatars. There's a few of them I know of, right? And they may not have been human before, and then they sort of are here. Apparently, there's 7 of them on the planet at any one time, and they have this immense energy field that makes change. And you could have thousands of people. One of them gives a hug. I don't know if you've ever come across the hugging saint, Amma, which she will stand there for like 3 days hugging people one after the other. And I've gone to see some of these people, Tom, and they really make a difference. People heal, people feel love and compassion and connection and change in their consciousness. So have you any
Okay.
experience on these avatars that have been implanted in our virtual
No,
reality? No?
No, I have no experience with those, but I call them NPCs,
Okay.
non-player characters.
Okay.
That's kind of the video game term for a similar sort of
NPC.
thing
Yeah.
where the system puts in a non-player character. They're not there with the free will awareness unit playing like everybody else, but they've been put into the game for a purpose, and that's what they do. And there's NPCs show up all the time for little cameo roles. They do things. If you pay attention, you can see lots of times most people will have a brush with an NPC now and again. You hear, the guy's lost in the woods and then he gets his arm caught in a crack in a rock and he can't move, and he was out hiking by himself, and he's just about on his last legs, and some guy shows up and gives him a drink of water and does this and does that, and he says, well, in a few minutes the people looking for you are going to find you. And but then that guy disappears. Who was that guy? Just, he's not there. And then the person remembers, oh yeah, he was dressed in a suit with you, like with you know he didn't have boots on. He had, like dress shoes on, and
Yeah.
he was in dress slacks, and he was wearing a hat of some sort. So they give a description of him, but it's not like somebody that's walking in the woods. So it's an NPC. It's come in to help that guy and to lead those searchers to where the guy is
And then
when
he
that's his function.
disappears.
So, and he just disappears. Yeah, NPCs come in and play a role like that because the system is not ready for that guy to die. He's evidently learning and growing and making some progress, and to just wink out because he got his arm caught in a rock, that's not good for the system. So the system finds a way to get around that problem. So NPCs come and do their thing. In some ways, it's just a one-off like that. You help a guy get loose and survive. You help children survive. Timmy falls in the well and somebody gets him out, and it's a stranger, and nobody knows where the stranger comes from or where he went. Nobody ever sees him again. He just was there to help Timmy get out of the well. So that happens. And like you say, there are people here just as, just like I said, Joe Rogan was, they're softening up the crowd, if you will, spreading goodwill, trying to, you know, it's the first act, if you will, it's the opening act. And because there's so much of that going on, it makes you think that we are moving toward a time in the not so distant future where we will take some much bigger steps toward growing up than we have in the past.
Mm.
Because there's a lot of activity moving that way. There's a lot of people now interested in spirituality and in growing up and in love. And
Yeah.
the whole idea was a tiny little idea living in a little sliver of the sidelines, and not so much anymore.
Mm.
It's grown. There's a lot of people like you who have programs and have meetings and interview people and are spreading. They're all different, but they're all helpful. They're all part of the solution. So there's literally tens of thousands of people that are the first act, warming up the crowd, getting things ready for something bigger that takes place, so that when it happens, it won't just fall dead. But a lot of people, there'll be 100,000, 200,000, a million people already primed for it, such that when it happens, they'll all rush to it and say, yeah, right, this is it. This is the way. Love is the answer, and this is the right thing. So I think the audience is being softened up for something that is planned. I don't know exactly what that is, but I think science is the way to get there, even though the scientists won't make the trip
Mm.
until much later because they're real hard-headed about their materialism. But they will set off the avalanche that just grows.
Mm. And Tom, the
Because
ones
there's
who,
there's so many
sorry,
people like that you described. These are the people, all these people that you're describing, they're the people who will get it. when it happens. They will be the first adopters and get it because they're out looking for it.
Yeah.
They're aware of it. They're looking for it. They want it. They just don't know how to put it into their politics and their institutions and their legal system. They don't know how to make the world change. But they are the change that the world needs themselves. They will change the world just by being who they are. And it's not the big heavy hand of God comes and rearranges things. That won't happen. It's that we have to grow up and grow up in enough numbers that the rest of them kind of flock to us because we're happy and they're not.
Mm. So Tom,
So,
those of us that do grow up and become love, do we ever outgrow the virtual reality?
well, probably not. For the most part, not. We don't outgrow the virtual reality. The virtual reality is where the action is. That's where the growth is. That's where really the rubber meets the road and people trying to grow up, having experiences that'll grow them up, having the freedom to try and do things and experiment. That's the place where most of that happens. So mostly we'll go right back in there because we want to help. We want to be part of the solution. There's a lot of people that need help, a lot of people that could use some guidance. So we'll want to go back and be part of that solution. So that's the thing. Now, are there other things to do? Very few. You could go to some other virtual reality and help there, but you're doing mostly the same thing. There are some jobs, so to speak, that aren't inside the virtual reality that you could take. Like in my books, you read about one such position I call the big cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's just a manager of a certain amount of the non-physical space, if you will, the non-physical things and beings. And that's mostly structural. We talked about there's the structure that allows the squishy, lovey stuff, to exist, makes it functional. So you have both. So you have some managers that are in charge of making sure the structure works and doesn't crumble and isn't overrun and that kind of stuff. And in the process of that, they make it more likely that the love stuff will grow and expand because there's a structure there that's waiting for it to grow and expand. So the structure's there to help it grow and expand into that. So there's some things like that, like the current big cheese is a guy who used to come here, used to have avatars here, but hasn't anymore for a long time, but used to. Been here many times.
And it's a big cheese.
The big cheese.
It's a guy. It's not a female.
No, this one is a guy. And once you get out of this virtual reality, there is no sex. There is no male and female. It's just consciousness. Consciousness doesn't come in gender. Gender is a thing that has to do with the way this virtual reality, evolved. So there is no gender outside of this, but most entities kind of tend to act like, connect with, have personalities, have styles that will remind you more of feminine or of masculine. So that's how you end up saying the big cheese is a guy. It's just the big cheese isn't a guy. It is not a female. They don't have sex there. The big cheese has mannerisms and actions that would remind you of maleness more than they remind you of femaleness.
Okay.
So that the big cheese when he was here, no doubt, was male and female both many times. But the maleness is more of the character that it plays, because maybe it's just because it's in a management role. So it's more in the father role than in the creative, the mother role. So maybe that's why it comes across as male.
Or would it be to suit us, our understanding of it? Because the board of directors, right? We could see the big cheese has been a businessman in a suit and, a boss man. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that could be. It's just maybe our perspective of that it just suits us to think of it that way. But no, there's not really any gender around there. But I'm just saying that's a position. You're an entity and you have a certain responsibility to see that the rules are not run over. Because if you let the rules be run over, you eventually have, what is it, where there are no rules? What's the word?
Anarchy.
I was going to say R, starts with an R, an AR. Arcane, that's not right. What's the word? Oh man, it's just on the tip of my tongue. Anarchy.
Yeah, I just said that.
Yeah, yeah, anarchy.
Yeah,
Yeah, you have anarchy if you don't have rules.
yeah.
And you have randomness. Everything is just doing whatever it wants, and it's all randomness. Nothing works. And that starts to self-destruct. Like I say, you have to have structure and rules in order to build something that functions. So the big cheese, his job is just to see that those who evolve to the negative side by making terrible choices that are all self-serving and all, about power and control and that sort of thing, that group doesn't create anarchy, doesn't create problems. So if you're going to have rules, then you need to have somebody that sees that the rules are met, that the rules aren't ignored, that the rules are rules and that they stand. And if you violate the rules, then you are removed. You're made to stand in a corner, for 10 minutes, like a bad child, that there's something that happens that stops that. Because otherwise, the negative side would tend to degenerate the system. And we know how that works. It doesn't take a lot of negativity to crash a lot of positivity.
Very quickly.
We'll use the World Trade Center. How
Yeah,
long did that take to build? How many people were involved in it? How much effort and money and resources were involved in it? It took years and years to build that up, the structure and so on. And how much time did it take to destroy it?
yeah,
10 minutes.
yeah.
So to build is always a more difficult process than to destroy. So just a very few bad actors can do a lot of destruction. So one needs to be aware of that and be ready to deal with it. Because to believe that there are no bad actors is to be foolish. There are bad actors. There are those that de-evolve and they find power, control, force to be to their liking. And if you let that ilk run free in your system, eventually your system will crumble because it's not like it takes an equal number of bad guys to crash, what the good guys have built. It just takes one or two or three or four bad guys to create a whole lot of damage. So destruction's simple. Destruction's easy. Building and creating something, of size and importance, that's difficult. That takes a lot of time and a lot of people working together to build it. But one person can set fire to it in seconds. So that's the problem. So you do need management here and there to make sure that the bad actors are not tearing the system apart. And that's just a necessary part of a larger system. We have free will. People are allowed to make terrible decisions. They're allowed to de-evolve and get nastier and nastier. De-evolved people love nothing more than chaos. Chaos is their pleasure. Destruction is their pleasure. Hurting others is their pleasure. So that's the system has to have some management here and there. So that's what the big cheese does. He's keeping the structure available for us to grow into.
So, Tom, that board of directors or the big cheese, right? If
Mm-hmm.
they see a plan, been plotted to do something, a catastrophe like that, do they get involved? Do they prevent? Okay.
Yeah, they can take action. Now, generally, it's not direct action. They just don't take the big fist
What
and
about the
hammer somebody.
NPCs?
But they, what can we say? They do it with as less ruckus as possible. They tend to alert those that may have leverage to help of the problem.
Mm.
They tend to organize those who would be, working against that particular thing. They they give us, if it's happening here, if it's something physically happening in this reality, they would give us some warning, some help, And maybe occasionally a big rock will just fall out of the sky and crush somebody that's having a problem, that's making a lot of trouble. But they generally get don't make big splashes,
Mm.
so that this is a virtual reality. You don't want to disturb it.
Yeah.
You want it to just run along like nothing is happening other than the virtual reality. You
Yeah.
don't want any drama to come into the reality. So it's all done subtly and without drama.
So a bad guy might
But
blow
yes,
himself up, right? Working on his
right,
explosives. Okay.
right. So things like that can happen now and again. But there's rules actually of things they can do and things they shouldn't do. And the negative side has rules as well. You might say, wars have rules, things you're supposed to do and things you don't do, trying to keep the level of destruction, from getting it so far. You make rules that actually protect both sides.
Mm.
And so there's some of those. And of course, the negative side doesn't mind cheating on the
Of
rules.
course.
That's what they're about. That's what they're about anyway. So there's there is some intrigue and some game playing and that going on. Yes. And the big cheese kind of watches over those kinds of things and tries to keep the negative from causing trouble.
And Tom, the negative side, right? Do they not feel really terrible when they carry out these terrible acts or even just thinking, negative? Like to me, it's just as plain as
Yeah,
day, right? That if I do good
right,
things, I feel
right.
good. I have this nice feeling. If I think something bad about it, my day doesn't go so good. I noticed that, just it's like there's a natural process that's kind of nudging me to do good things, right? It's like, I don't know, I think you talk about that like a fundamental process that's sort of
Hmm.
nudging us all along. So surely
Yes,
that's
there
working
is.
against the people doing wrong.
They deny, they overcome that with force. They don't, for them, creating a lot of misery and dysfunction is what makes them happy.
Mm.
If they can create chaos and dysfunction and hurt and problems, then that makes them smile. But are they happy people? No. Do they have joy in their life? No. The only joy they have is being dysfunctional. Destroying things is their joy. So you could just think about them in their normal state. No, they're miserable people.
Mm.
The only fun they have is breaking things, trashing things, and it's almost a getting even for
Mm.
the positive side of being happy and having joy and good lives or something like that. And they don't, so they get even by breaking everything. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. No, they don't feel, it's not so much they feel good or bad. They kind of live in a numb space most of the time and find joy in chaos.
Mm.
Other than that, they're pretty numb.
Yeah, that's pretty sad, Tom. It's pretty sad. Yeah. So Tom, I think we've probably covered everything.
Well, good,
Yeah, I think it's been absolutely
good.
fascinating. I had no kind of structure of where this was going to go, but it just kind of uh, played out amazingly.
That usually is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
I have lots of times when interviewers call me up and they want an interview and they say, "Do you want me to send you questions that I'm going to ask?" And I say, "No, don't send me any questions.
Mm.
Just make it up or just give me your questions as they come because that actually makes a much more interesting
Yeah.
conversation if it's
Yeah.
real and live and genuine, a few people just interacting together, than if you have people giving canned speeches.
Mm.
Okay, you sent me 10 questions and I've memorized my answers for those 10 questions. So you sound like a you sound like a can machine asking the questions and I sound like a can machine answering the questions and everybody goes to sleep because that's not nearly as interesting. It's just
Yeah.
letting the conversation evolve naturally into wherever it goes.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. This is a great example, Tom. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's been a
I
real.
appreciate the opportunity to come
Oh,
and meet with you again and see that you're doing so well, that you've progressed so much and learned so much, and now you're sharing it and helping other people learn, which is exactly right on track for what you're doing. You know, you're doing it perfectly well. And the more you grow up, the larger the crowd it is you'll be dealing with.
mm,
Yeah. So
yeah.
just it's great
Thank you,
to
Tom.
see you and connect with you again.
I really appreciate it. And it's been such a, it's always been in the back of my mind doing this podcast is like, I really want to get Tom on, just because you had such a big influence on me. And I mean, I honestly, I would not be doing what I am today if it wasn't for your work and the message that you put out, through your videos and,
Mm.
you know, so thank
Well,
you.
mostly what I do is, you're welcome. Mostly what I do is I show you possibilities that you hadn't thought of before, possibilities of ways of being, things that could happen. I have a lot of people who will say that, they read my book, and while they're reading my book, they have out of bodies and all kinds of experiences while they're reading it or right after they've read it. And I say that's because those things weren't possible to you before. Those were things were all impossible. You read about them, and suddenly you realize that's not impossible. It's part of being conscious, part of who we are. We can do this thing. And as soon as you have that thought comes through your mind, well, now you're free. You had the belief that it was impossible or even didn't know that it was possible. So a lot of that, it's not that my magic makes people grow up. It's not like that, but I give off, I show possibilities, and people will take those possibilities and run with them, do
Mm.
things with them, grow
Well, there,
from them, try this, try that. Make your own toe. That's what I tell people. My
mm,
big toe, if you want to use that as a structure, a model, or something to help you get started, but you really need to create your own big toe, because if it's not your experience, then it's not your truth. If you want it to be your truth, you can't just do it intellectually. You can't just sit and listen to Gareth and Tom have a conversation. You've got to get out there and be it. Connect with it. See how it feels. See how it works. Live it. That's the important thing. It's got to be your experience, not your intellectual understanding. And that is a place where most people get lost. They go into it strictly with an intellectual understanding and have a hard time turning it into their lifestyle, their way of interacting with people. That requires that they change who they are, that they interact with people differently. Now, changing who you are is a hard thing for most people. That's why this evolutionary process is so slow.
mm.
People have to just change themselves. We're not trying to create better actors, we're trying to create better people. Yeah, so it's a long, slow process. And if a book or a talk or anything opens you up to new possibilities, well, that's a gift.
Mm.
Take those new possibilities and make them yours by going out and experiencing it. Somebody's talked to you about remote viewing. Well, go learn how to do it. Go practice it, remote view. And then once you've done it a few times and surprised yourself terribly that you got a real, you know, a real difficult picture and you got it just right, well, you don't have to do it anymore. You realize that this is true. But that truth won't come to you just because you read about it or even just because you believe it. All right, I've read a lot of people and they say that's true, so I'll believe it too. But now it's a belief. The belief isn't useful. You have to
Yeah.
know that it's true because you get involved in it.
Well, Tom, that was my experience when I first came across you and Bob, and you were talking about out of body experiences, right? And I was like, you know, I trust these guys. I really do. There's something about them, but I need to have it myself. Otherwise it's
Sure.
risky business just believing, you know. So I had
Absolutely.
to go and do it myself.
Hmm.
Mm,
It's always risky business if you believe.
Yeah.
Belief is the enemy. Go find out. Go do it yourself. And yes, that takes time, but this is life. You've got your whole life for this, and then after this one's over, you got another life and another one after that. I mean, this is what you're here for, is to figure these things out by becoming them, trying it, see how it works, do it, study it. Yeah, that's the thing. It's not an armchair thing that you do by listening to Gareth, in his talks, or listening to Tom, or reading his books. Those things might help, but you have to actually go do it, become it, try it out. Then you start growing. You don't grow up because of what you listen to. Yeah, you don't grow up from an experience. Experience may trigger you to grow up, but the experience itself doesn't grow you up. Even big spiritual experiences. People will have that experience of being one with, the white light, and they lose their identities, and they're everything. They're a piece of every leaf, every blade of grass. They're a part of and they have that experience because they take LSD or some other drug, and now they feel like they're spiritual. It doesn't work like that. Taking a drug will not make you spiritual.
Gives you an experience.
Having a spiritual experience won't make you spiritual. You have to be it. You have to become it. You have to grow up. You can have the experience, but the experience doesn't change who you are unless you change because of the experience. Now that can change who you are. But if the experience changes you, good. If the experience is just an experience, then it's maybe entertaining, but it's not going to get you anyplace any better than where you are.
It might be a carrot on a stick, right? Just to lead you to evolve, to grow, to learn more.
It could be, absolutely. Yeah, how about a little taste of this?
Yeah. Yeah, I see it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Great message. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay,
It's been
thank
fun.
you. It's been great. And thank you to the viewers and listeners. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yes. So long. Bye-bye.
This has been the Endless Possibilities Podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds. Gareth is a lifelong seeker of truth, a spiritual teacher and author, and it's his passion to delve into the profound world of consciousness. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, the podcast is available on YouTube and all the major podcasting platforms. Find us on Instagram at @the_mother_force. Take care, and we'll see you soon on the Endless Possibilities Podcast.